Well, it's been a couple years since the last Genesis Revisited Steve Hackett live album. Had to do a mental thought. I'm like, wait, has it been? Yeah, 2020. That was the last one. And I kind of went into this one with the objective of just giving it a listen so I can cover it on a quarter notes. And seems like I've got a lot more to say about this one. So let's dive in. Genesis Revisited Live, Seconds Out and More by Steve Hackett. So, Steve Hackett is the ex-Genesis, I almost said keyboardist, that's Tony, lead guitarist. He took over from Anthony Phillips back in 1971, I believe, and stayed with the band pretty much for like the next 5 or 6 albums until Wind and Wuthering, and then left the band and wasn't really replaced. So, and he had a very prolific solo career and kind of continued on with the progressive rock scene as Genesis went more and more into the pop scene with albums like, the first one of The Voyage of the Accolade, I think that was, Please Don't Touch, and Spectral Mornings, and just kind of continued on from there, putting out like his own solo stuff once every couple of years or so. And back in about 2012 or so, started to do a lot more of the Genesis Revisited stuff when he was promoting his then second Genesis Revisited, where he recorded a bunch of his tracks from Genesis and realizing that he's really pulling a huge audience. And basically from 2012, every couple of years, he goes back and kind of does more of the same. This is, I believe, if I've counted correctly, his 7th album doing this since 2012. First one being Genesis Revisited Live at Hammersmith, which still I think might be one of my favorite ones, which was then followed up in 2014 with pretty much the exact track lengths with Live at the Royal Albert Hall. These two albums, what made them kind of special was the amount of guest appearances. Everyone from John Wetton to Steve Rothery came on to kind of help and flesh out a lot of these tracks. And since then, as I mentioned, he's put out 7, ranging from Wuthering Nights, where he covers a lot of tracks from like a specific album, like Wind and Wuthering, or back in 2020 was Selling England by the Pound, or he's trying something different with like a whole incorporating of an orchestra back in 2019, which was Genesis Revisited Band and Orchestra. And so in this one, he's covering probably one of the most famous PROG live albums, which is Seconds Out, and covering the entirety of that live album. But starting off, it was very interesting that he stuck to his solo stuff for the first 6 tracks. So I guess like the first disc on this record. And the solo material that he's got, it kind of ranges between fan favorites and deep cuts. The fan favorites being Clocks, Everyday, and Shadow of the Hierophant. And kind of sandwiched between those, you have the Apollo intro being the first track, Held in Shadows, and The Devil's Cathedral, kind of spicing things up. So it's really interesting that he started off this with his own stuff, and then he goes straight into the entire track lengths of Seconds Out. And in some respects, this kind of works, but this is one of the only major criticisms that I have on this. When you have about, just shy of 20 minutes worth of extra music that you could have put on this album, he should have put on other Genesis tracks that generally don't get to see the light of day, especially Genesis tracks that would have been around at that time. There's really only one track from Wind and Wuthering, which is Afterglow. Why not have, the other 2 tracks that lead into Afterglow on this to kind of help flesh it out? Because there's Squonk, Robbery, Assault, and Battery, as well as Dance to the Volcano and Los Endos. There's 4 tracks from Trick of the Tail. Still only 1 track from Wind and Wuthering. You have about the same amount of tracks, maybe 3 tracks from Selling England. You have 2 or 3 tracks from The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Only 1 track from Foxtrot, but it is, the big one, A Supper's Ready, which he plays practically at every single live show. Maybe 7 Stones from Nursery Crimes, the first track that he had on there, or perhaps even having, The Fountain of Semelix, kind of breathe new life into there, because that was a track that Genesis did play post Steve Hackett, that Steve Hackett really helped out with. Heck, even have Can Unity and the Coastliners from Foxtrot kind of help flush out this. But I think the major one that I really wish that they had more on here was Wind and Wuthering. Specifically because, 2 or 3 live albums previous to this, you had the Wind and Wuthering show, where he did do like One for a Vine, 11th Hour of Mar, and really helped flush it out in that sense. Heck, he could have even done Blood on a Rooftop, and I don't think anybody would have batted an eye about it. And kind of like interwoven those tracks maybe at the halfway point, like where you have the musical box ending the first real disc and then going into Supper's Ready, maybe put all the tracks on there so you have like a more continuous flow of Genesis tracks. But anyway, that's my own little soapbox. That's my own little, I don't want to even say gripe, but more of like an observation. Like if I was in charge of the whole thing, this is kind of what I would suggest. But in terms of the actual music that we have on here, man, this is top tier. Like the boys have been playing pretty much consistently since 2012, and the lineup really hasn't changed, with Robert King on keyboards, Jonas Ringgold on bass, and man, Jonas is one of my favorite bass players playing right now, so I'm glad to see him on here. Rob Townsend on saxophone and flutes, Craig Blundell on drums, and man, Craig, hats off to you, man. You are doing the impossible. And finally, Ned Sliven on vocals, with Amanda Lehan on guitars and vocals as well. At this point, they kind of know the ins and outs of one another and play well within it. And again, this is another little observation because I just want to get this all out of the way before we dive into the album proper. Craig Blundell's drum work is superb. The only drawback, though, is a lot of these tracks, because they were played live on Seconds Out and they had Chester Thompson or Bill Bruford. I think Bill Bruford was only on Cinema Show, but those two guys plus Phil Collins, so you basically had 2 drummers whenever you're going into a musical interlude. The best drummer on the face of the earth can't do what 2 drummers are doing, especially when you're competing with Chester Thompson and Phil Collins, 2 of the greatest drummers of all time. So man, that is a Herculean task, and Craig is able to hold his own for the most part, but every once in a while it does kind of shine through. It's like, oh, right, there's only one guy doing this at the moment, and they really could have spent that extra little bit to have another drummer come on and help Craig out, because it was really needed, especially on the 1-2 punch of Dance on a Volcano and Los Endos. And I mean, the drumming solo that Craig was given between the handoff between these 2 tracks was exquisitely done as a solo drummer. But it still doesn't compare to that Double Blood. Yeah, it just doesn't compare. And that was the only time where I'm like, ooh, you got this, man, you got this. But keep in mind, there's usually 2. So, yeah. But other than that, holy geez, the music on here really did blow me away. Squonk, Carpet Crawlers, Robbery, Assault, and Battery, they were, the usual kind of come into effect for Steve Hackett's work. It wasn't until Afterglow that I was just like, whoa, they are doing something a little bit different on this one, because Afterglow is a little bit quicker than we're used to, especially within the later live performances of Afterglow within Genesis. I really like how it flushes the music out and really does breathe new life into it. The same can definitely be said about First the Fifth as well, but I know what I like was particularly really, really well done, especially with how much space and time Rob Townsend was given on the saxophone and the flute. And I believe there's also a little bit of a clarinet there, or I could be wrong. But his amount of time and space that he was given, which was usually given to Phil Collins when he's doing the whole tambourine bit, really did flush out and really breathe this more jazzy approach to the track overall, as well as The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Really well done once we get into that one, and the musical box closing session was quite well done. Some of the aspects that we had on Supper's Ready as well, and I appreciate the fact that they present Supper's Ready very similarly to how it was presented on Seconds Out, where when we get into the Apocalypse in 8/9 time, the band takes a little bit of a step back to allow Tony Banks's playing styles on the keyboards really flush out and really breathe new life into it, to allow the band to slowly creep itself back, very similar to how they were done on Seconds Out, rather than how Steve Hackett usually presents it in the live setting here. Love it, very well done, but not much more that we can say about it. Cinema Show particularly was very, very well done. Love the playout, love how big this was. There was a couple points, especially within the playout and the instrumental version, where the synth comes in and that mellotron hits so hard, and I was blown away, like, whoa, we've got some really powerful songs on here and sounds on here. Damn, that's tasty. And the final two tracks of Dance on a Volcano and Los Endos, oh, mwah, chef's kiss. Very well done of playing this album out. So, yeah, in the end, this album was a joy. This live album was an absolute joy. This is one of the few that I would consider actually picking up rather than just coming back to and, you know, streaming every once in a while. I feel like, I don't know, there's only so many times you can go back to this well without it basically starting to stagnate. But we've got something a little bit new on this one, and I particularly enjoyed it. Again, if you've heard one live Genesis Revisited album from Steve Hackett, you've pretty much heard them all, but this one at least has a little bit more of a nugget of fun found within it. I wouldn't necessarily go and running out to pick it up, but I would consider picking this one up eventually. And I think that's what I'm eventually going to rate it. So I will say that Genesis Revisited Live, Seconds Out and More from Steve Hackett, is one that I would absolutely pick up in physical format. You know, the last one that I picked up from him was the Genesis Revisited Band and Orchestra, because that band did breathe a lot of new life. But the whole Selling England by the Pound and Wuthering Nights and the Total Experience and all the rest, you know, you can pick up one and basically have the entire collection. But I think that there's something just a little bit extra special on this one, especially because Seconds Out is one of my all-time favorite live albums. I still think that they could have done a little bit more just to kind of spiced it up by incorporating a little bit more of that, you know, Genesis tracks rather than opening it up with a bunch of Steve Hackett's solo stuff. But that's just my own little gripe. Anyway, that's it for me on this one. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Is it just another one of Steve Hackett's many Genesis Revisited live albums, or is there something special to be found on this one? Let me know about all your thoughts by commenting down below. And that's all I got for you guys today. That's all I got. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.